Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home. I'm Katey Rich from Vanity Fair. The SAG-AFTRA Foundation has a COVID-19 relief fund to support SAG-AFTRA performers who are in urgent need as this pandemic continues. Since March of 2020, the foundation has given over $6.1 million in aid to 6,500 performers and families facing extreme hardship. If you are a SAG-AFTRA member and you need help, please ask. And if you are able to help support our community and this crucial effort, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Eddie Redmayne from the trial of the Chicago 7. So Eddie, before we start the conversation, I wanted to check in and see how you and your family are doing, as I know the UK is in lockdown. Are you guys all hanging in there despite the intensity of the pandemic?
You know, we're incredibly lucky, actually. We're here. Despite the intensity of the pandemic, the film production is still going on, and I'm shooting the third of the Fantastic Beasts movies, which was sort of meant to finish months ago, but we've been shooting it for almost a year now, with all the breaks in between. But now, so the lion's share of the homeschooling has now had to go to my wife. But we're pretty, it's quite intense lockdown. But I'm still going to work, which feels strange, but lucky. Yeah,
I mean, we're here to talk about the trial of Chicago 7, which is a movie completed in much more ordinary circumstances. But I'm just very curious, as an actor, like working under COVID, like, do you feel like you're learning how to act all over again? Is it working fairly normally once you get on set?
I feel like one of the things I've admired most about film crews is their capacity to adapt to circumstance, whether it's locations, whether it's environments. I'm always kind of astounded by how their film crews generally seem to be yes people that will make it work and make it happen. So the amount of work that went in production-wise to sorting it so that we could keep shooting was, I think, astonishing. But on a day-to-day now, we're testing every day. Masks are the prerequisite, but you become and then if someone tests positive or something, and we all leave and the sets are fumigated, and until everyone's tests come in positive. So it sounds kind of extreme, but we've been very, very lucky that that's seldom happened. So once you take all that away, it does feel kind of normal. It's normalized itself pretty promptly. I think for the producers, they would go, this couldn't be less normal, but they make it for the actors feel all right.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, and then that's what movie sets are. Is a lot of people pulling a lot of levers to make it so you can get there and do your work.
Exactly, which is disgusting. But you're absolutely right. to make us feel like everything is really settled and that we're absolutely fine. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so let's talk about the trial of Chicago 7, which again you filmed, what now feels like probably so long ago, before everything changed. Aside from the really obvious of Aaron Sorkin sends you a script and you say yes, like what was it that made you really perk up and pay attention to this and want to be a part of it?
There's that base thing for me of how quickly you read a script. Now, I was on holiday. I had food poisoning. I was in Marrakesh. I had also broken my foot on the job just beforehand. So I'd arrived on holiday in Marrakesh with my wife, and I had got food poisoning. I was like the least fun person to go on holiday with, and I was pretty miserable. And then suddenly this script arrived, and a mate of mine was joking to me the other day that I'd always wanted to work for Aaron Sorkin. I was obsessed with The West Wing, and he was like, "Yeah, you're obsessed with The West Wing because it's basically the only thing you've watched. Like, you bollocked onto us all about it for years, but about 20 years after everyone else had." And I sort of thought I'd made this great discovery. And I adored Aaron's writing, and so when the script arrived, it really was a thrilling prospect, and I read it. And was astounded by how little I knew, not just about that trial, but about that moment in American history. And I found it this kind of formidable mixture of being something that felt urgent, that felt incredibly compelling. It was and yet, even though I didn't know anything about the circumstance, I understood it all, and it didn't feel like it was preaching to me. And I also found it deeply funny. And so I called up and said, yes, please, I would love to. And only then did I kind of look into the history of the project and realize it had been around for 13 years, which I found astonishing, because I genuinely hadn't read a film script that was quite so searing and vital in that way. And I thought, how could this possibly have been? And reading that Spielberg had been attached and Paul Greengrass, and so I became incredibly excited. And then it was a sort of 2-year process of the film. There was one moment where my wife and my children and I were all ready to go to Toronto. I'd been working in London with a wonderful dialect coach called Michael Buster, who'd flown over, and we were going in a couple of weeks. And then I got a call from my dialect coach going, can you believe it's fallen through? And I was like, what? What? We're going in 2 weeks ago.
There must be people to tell these things to you who don't, not that.
Well, I think weirdly they'd sort of, somehow it came through those channels. But and weirdly, it then was months and months and months. And I kind of had this thing where I couldn't quite let myself believe that this would happen. But I've never hounded my agents more for sort of day-to-day shifts in whether it was going to happen or not. But right the way, Katey, through filming, it felt like and I've done some big studio movies, and I've done lots of tiny little indies, and never have I felt that a film might fall apart on the day more than I did on this, right the way through the making of it. So, and I to this day don't quite understand why. I think it was the price of it was expensive, given all the riots and all that sort of thing. And was there going to be a big enough audience, and was it going to be relevant? And then of course, since we made the film, it's just become more and more relevant.
I'm sure you had the feeling, even when you got the script, that Aaron Sorkin, I think, said he did it like in 2016. He really felt compelled to bring it back out, that it is more relevant now than it was in 2007. It was more relevant in October than it would have been in March. And it's more relevant this week, as, I mean, watching the impeachment happen for incitement of riot, like I immediately thought of Tom Hayden. I assume you did too. It's really incredible.
Absolutely. And thinking about completely thinking also about the Capitol, and thinking about how long it took for the National Guard to come in, and then thinking about Chicago, and thinking of it being Daley had made it into a military state. But it was, since we finished the film, which was not last November, but November before that. Mm-hmm. As the year 2020 panned out, whether it was the pandemic, there was a sort of, a great flu pandemic in '68. Whether it was the Black Lives Matter movement, protest, all of these things, the relevance just became so scarily paralleling. That the law and Trump running on sort of Law and Order and all these things, that I sort of kept thinking, gosh, this film's got to come out now, or it's going to, because of that relevance, but also it's going to become, is it going to miss a moment in which it can remind us to look to our history? Mm-hmm. But then sadly, as you say, it's just like each week something else seems to happen. And I suppose what it's actually saying is that these are mammoth themes. They're things that have repeated themselves consistently historically, and they're not going anywhere.
I mean, I think there's been, over time, people have been like, oh, I wish I had been alive in 1968. There was so much happening. Like the world was active. And I don't know about you, but right now I'm just like, I would love less interesting times. I wish things would quiet down a little bit.
I'd love a bit of dull. Dull would be really wonderful.
We hope we can get there. So to talk about Tom Hayden, Aaron Sorkin is so famous for his characters, for writing them. You watch The West Wing, you know how that works. How does he fit for you in kind of the lineage of like Josh Lyman, or does he feel like a different from a traditional Aaron Sorkin character, maybe because he's based on this real person?
Well, I think what's interesting about Tom is that of all the Chicago 8, Tom was the one that Aaron was close to and met and spent quite a lot of time with, and I think had quite a sort of rigorous relationship with. What was interesting to me about playing Tom in relation to some of the other real life people that I've played this was a moment in Tom's life, and this is Tom as part of an ensemble, and this is also Tom representing a certain color, as it were, within this kind of polychrome take or painting of as it were. Aaron always described it as that, because he said this is a painting, not a photograph, and he encouraged us. Of course, all of us delved into the research and principally because that's one of the great joys of our job is getting to learn about things you don't know. But you do all that research, but then kind of you throw it away. And he really didn't. There wasn't time or budget for prosthetics or for even accent-wise. There was some very specific things that Hayden had. He had a sort of ing words. He'd often finish with a sort of an N rather, and that was not encouraged. Almost, it was like, don't take it to somewhere that's so specific that it might jump out. We want, this is the importance of ensemble here. So it was interesting, I suppose. He basically gave us the license to be much more free. You definitely feel responsibility for the character you're playing. You want to immerse yourself in as much of his history, but you also don't want to show your homework. I did a play years ago with Alfred Molina, and he's such a wonderful, kind and wise man, but he always used to describe, like, no one wants to see your homework. So you do all that sort of stuff and then hopefully throw it away and just get to play in the moment with this particularly astonishing troupe of actors.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about you and Alfred Molina, because you've done theater, you've done lots of theater. That play was particularly famous. It was the two of you, but this is theater with 16 people on stage at the same time. Like, it's such a big ensemble. You're all thrown in there together. And it's fascinating that you said that Aaron told you you're kind of part of the same painting. Is that the key to making an ensemble feel like an ensemble, that you kind of know it the whole time, that you're not in your own head and have to be aware of everybody else?
I think, I think one of the great joys of this film for all of us was that the ensemble nature of it, and the fact that we were all shooting in one room for weeks, and in most of those scenes, Hayden barely speaks for the entire trial. You're listening. You really are. You're there to witness extraordinary people do extraordinary things, but also to listen. And the cameras were often at a distance and capturing us, not in close-ups, but in wide shots. So you had to be consistently alive, and there to support everyone else. And that, of course, on stage is what happens, because you all are entirely interdependent on each other's protection and kind of elevation in some ways. But often in film, it's it's not so much like that. And that was what was completely wonderful about that. And I remember Frank Langella saying to me, this doesn't come along very often, that ensemble in the true sense. And we all felt that, and felt lucky to get to watch each, whether it's Yaya doing extraordinary things or Mark Rylance, each day was like you got to see some other kind of virtuoso thing.
Yeah, you and Sasha were in Les Mis, but I don't know if you were ever on screen together. Did you have any pre-existing connections with anybody, or is everyone kind of coming in fresh for each other in this ensemble?
With Sasha, I did get to share a scene with him in Les Mis. I got to punch him.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I was playing a revolutionary, so it's basically totally typecast.
I remember that. Oh, I got to rewatch.
I got to try it. Well, so you didn't miss that much in that moment. So in this one, I try to punch him again. I'm playing a revolutionary, so we're basically caught in a catch-22
time loop.
In time, I did, but. So within that thing that I was saying about Aaron wanting us all to be within the same painting, it was also one of the great things about it was all these different styles, and that's what the film demanded. It was sort of jazz meets punk meets classical and Francine Maisler and Aaron had cast it in such an interesting way that you had Sasha with his sort of his background in improvisational stuff and adding things, and then you had Jeremy Strong, who has done such rigorous research, and I barely heard him speak. I knew Jeremy beforehand, but barely heard him speak in his real accent, or Alex Sharp similarly, and until after the event. And all of those different techniques, I do think, created a sort of delicious tension, actually, that kicked off on screen.
Yeah, I think about the moment where I think early in the trial, you guys all go back to the break room and you're trying to kind of confront, Tom's confronting Abby Hoffman and being like, we need to be on the same page here. And it really does feel like these two people have come from different planets almost. And that's you're within the same movie, but those characters are so at odds with each other that, you have to keep that tension, exactly like what you're saying.
Well, what was interesting in that was silly things like, well, not silly things, helpful things for me, like costuming. So, we looked at, Tom's wardrobe and he loved a corduroy jacket, but we made the corduroy jacket just slightly more tailored and the tie slightly more done up, even though that actually wasn't Tom. He was more he was much less preppy than he's portrayed, but it was important to Aaron that the contrast between Abby and Tom sort of sang from the opening of the movie, really. But that there's also the other great insight that Aaron told me, was that for him, one of the emotional centers of the movie was this relationship between Abby and Tom, and he saw it in a fraternal way. He saw it as two brothers who were completely different, aspired for the same thing, but had completely different ways of approaching it, and that rooted something. And I've known Sacha for years. He's hilarious. He rips the shit out of me. Like, he's incredibly funny, and there is an older brother kind of quality to him that I adore. And it was so helpful because it meant that we could go at each other, but with love, I suppose. And what was hilarious in the big confrontation scene, which we have, I went over to Sacha and was like, this is the big brother moment. And he's like, what? And I was like, oh, that thing that Aaron told us about, how the film's about two brothers. He's like, Aaron didn't tell me that. Which got Aaron? He's like, Aaron? and Aaron did tell him that at that moment. And Sacha always goes, he was so thrilled that it was at that point that he told him, because it kind of brought quite a lot to that specific scene before the big, before his cross-examination.
I saw Sacha did an interview, I think it was the New York Times, and it ends with him saying he can't believe Tom Hayden got with Jane Fonda, and then that feels like some older brother razzing there of maybe Tom Hayden, not you, but. Well,
I think it brought, I think, do you know what? If you watch the real Tom Hayden, I don't think I get that quality across. He's pretty fucking. I think he's really sexy. He has this kind of rhetorically, he has this really interesting thing that when you see him speak on podiums and reaching huge crowds, he doesn't push. He kind of pulls people. He has a musicality to the tone of his voice, which I tried to infer a bit in just that tiny scene at the beginning in which you see him talking to this group of people. And it's almost a monotony to the way he talks, but it's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sacha.
I mean, we see him in front of the microphone in the beginning, like you said, with that very calm, measured demeanor, and throughout the whole film, he's there trying to keep his cool, and then it builds to this moment where he really loses his cool. And how do you walk that line, especially when you're filming out of order and the movie jumps all over the place, to know that you're building to this point and that we believe this guy would lose it in front of a microphone the way that he did.
That was a lot about the listening in the trial. That was a lot about, and occasional moments I would go to Aaron, again, because the speed of the shoot was so quick and because we couldn't do close coverage, but I'd go, Aaron, I think that you need to have a moment there of Tom just listening for that, because the way that I've charted the kind of that build, in case you probably won't need it, but just in case you do need it, it needs to be charted. Otherwise, there's not that you don't believe in that. And similarly, it was important to me that, and this was actually a really interesting thing from an actor's point of view. As I said, I was a massive Sorkin fan, and was and remains a bit of a hero. And when you get a script that was as complete as this, but then of course you start looking at it from your character's point of view and finding their way through it. And the one question I had for Aaron before we started filming was, I get that he's the earnest one in comparison to Abby's, you know, ebullience and humor. But if he's so earnest and that's it, and to one note throughout the beginning of the movie, I think the audience are going to just check out of him, and you're not going to engage enough to stay with him to the end. Mm-hmm. And so Aaron actually put in some quip moment, like cows are smarter than, you know, those sorts of the little moments of Tom's humor, just so that you saw that he had, which of course he did in real life, he had a lot of that edge and wit. But the other thing was really making sure that you believed in Tom and Rennie's relationship, mm-hmm. That Rennie was like his little brother, and so that when you saw this guy being battered, that was a catalyst for him to really kick off. But it was an interesting thing to play, like just keeping that tension kind of burning as these people behave in a way that that he just completely disagrees with.
Yeah. Do you connect with Tom on any of those levels personally? Like, you know, do you bring part of yourself in every role that you play, but do you see yourself in anything particular about him?
I mean, God, probably too much. I mean, yes, I mean, lots of things. I mean, and this year is making me question lots of those things about systems and sort of belief in systems but I think what the film does is it shows you that I kind of love that Aaron doesn't make judgment on whose take is right, Abby's or Tom's. He's like, I think you need you sort of need both. You need progressives. You kind of need to learn to govern and protest, and you need and that those two things have to coincide. You need the loud anarchic voices, but you also need the people who can work within the system to try and change it, which of course Tom went on to do.
Yeah. And I think there's a sadness built into the film too, even though it has this triumphant ending, that they tried both ways and they succeeded in some ways, but you know, we're also still facing so many of the same problems, that history does repeat itself, and that no one really solved it then, which is why we're where we are.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's why that's why daily you keep reading things and kind of trying to make sense of it.
So you talk about, you know, having a conversation with Aaron and he adds things to the script, but as a director, when you're on set on a day-to-day basis, like what's he giving you guys? How is he, you know, threading this entire large ensemble together? And when you're working with him as a director, you're like, oh yeah, that's the mind that wrote the script. Does that make a difference that he's kind of playing?
It absolutely does. And one of the most lovely things about Aaron is, despite his success, is he expresses great vulnerability. He's like, he'll say, and we had a conversation before in New York. I remember basically him asking me how I liked to be directed. And that was really helpful, because I could be quite specific with the things that are helpful to me and not. But he also would really listen. So, for example, and react to what you were asking. So, for example, the big cross-examination between Kunstler and Tom at the end that happens in the conspiracy office, the kind of that was on screen exactly as it was written on the page. So it cross-cuts between this cross-examination and what happens on the page. But I said to Aaron, look, what happened was to prep that from an actor's point of view, as I'm sure a lot of the actors out there would maybe approach in a similar way. I kind of needed to know what the gaps were. So when it cuts to the real time thing, I needed to go, to the flashback, I needed to go, okay, what's in there? So I said to myself, do you think I can ask Aaron Sorkin to write like all these intermittent bits for me? And I was like, no, I probably can't. This is before I'd met him. I was like, no, I probably can't do that. So I'll just go and I'll write it myself, write my own version of what I think it would be, kind of, but then I was then going, well, I need to, what if I got it wrong? Like, what if it's not what he thinks? So maybe I maybe I need to check with Aaron. So I sent this email to Aaron Sorkin, which was my version, my writing, basically my version of that scene. So,
you being Aaron Sorkin, right?
Being Aaron Sorkin. I actually wrote, I'm going beetroot in thinking about it, but I wrote, hi Aaron, I hope you're well. Then, I wanted to just, fill in these gaps, but of course, I wanted to ask you to do it, but I would never think that you would have time to do it. So I do, so I've done it myself, but please don't be offended if I sent this thing. And then kind of woke up in hot sweats in the middle of the night going, what I do? I got this hilarious and sweet email the following morning. Thanks for that, Eddie. I'll give it a shot myself. And he wrote this brilliant scene, which Mark and I then, of course, shot in one long take, which they then cut into the bits as they do. And it meant that you, performance-wise, can, rather than just punching in for little moments, you can build an ebb and flow. And that was pretty joyful. Also because Mark Rylance basically gave me my first ever job.
Really?
20 years ago. Not 20 years ago, that's a lie. Almost 20 years. Yes, 20 years ago. So he genuinely gave me a career, really. So then getting to go head to head with him in that scene was pretty wonderful.
Wait, what was the job?
So at the time, Mark was the artistic director of the Globe Theatre in London. And I was at university, and it was the 400th anniversary of Twelfth Night. And Twelfth Night was written for the Middle Temple Hall, which is this lawyer's inn in London. And 400 years on, they had commissioned the Globe to come and put on a commemorative production, and they were doing it in all male original practices. And so Mark was playing Olivia, and they were looking for a young actor to play Viola. And they came to the universities, and so I played Viola opposite him, which was amazing.
And I think Americans, we tend to think that all British stage actors have all known each other at some point, and you're really not doing anything to dispel that cliche that you and Mark Rylance worked together 20 years ago.
I know, I'm afraid that is true. Although Alex Sharp, wonderful Alex, who's in who plays Rennie Davis, I had never actually met. So that's not
okay. So there's not entirely connected. It's really interesting looking at the work you've done since the Theory of Everything, since you have been seemingly careful and chosen deliberately what you want to do, had a lot of variety. Obviously Aaron Sorkin comes calling, you're always going to answer, but not a lot of actors don't get to choose. And I think, even actors of your stature sometimes don't get to choose, but it seems like you are. And I'm curious about what your thought process is, what you are looking for in the work that you do, and how you chart your path now that you are where you are.
Well, honestly, the oddest thing about it is you go from, or I have gone from, auditioning for everything, everything and anything. If you get the job, you do the job, to one job changing that, which was for me was the Theory of Everything. And what's so interesting is it's not like you became a better actor overnight. It's just happened that you got really lucky with an extraordinary job that lots of people had turned down, and you managed to get, and it went well. And the thing, and suddenly you have choice, and it's not something that I'd ever had before. And weirdly, I was totally unprepared for it. And because you're so used to receiving scripts going, here is a script, Cate Blanchett is attached, here is the part of so-and-so which they want you to audition for. It's being produced and directed by these people. And you kind of can see through all the kudos of, who's associated, perhaps whether it's good before you even start reading it. And then suddenly overnight, you're being sent scripts at an early stage, and it's thrilling that, but you then have to sort of make the choice to jump on or not. And so
you're the engine suddenly when you've never been
momentarily, and of course, all actors' lives are ebbs and flows, and that you'll have a high moment and then low moments. And but for that moment, you do. And so for me, I purely have relied on instinct, in the sense of when I read a script, again, it's an Alfred Molina, wise Molina notes.
I love this. He's like the sage following your career.
He is the sage. He's genuinely. But I remember, he would also say that it was just something I really I sympathized with and felt myself, which is that there's a point when you're reading a script when suddenly halfway through your stomach lurches and you realize that you've got to do it. And your head goes from reading this character as a character to imagining you sort of doing it, and all the anxiety that then starts spooling, and that is that. So that tends to be the thing. It is gut. It is instinct. I mean, Fantastic Beasts, for example, I read the first script and I found it, wonderful, and it was a world that I wanted to be in. But then you don't get to see what else is coming. But what you do get to do is kind of see the films that have been made before and the creatives that are sort of behind it. But certainly with Sorkin, it just, I don't think I'm a really slow reader. I don't think I've ever read something so quickly.
Well, the movie feels that way too. As we was rewatching it, and the beginning just throws you in there, and it moves so fast, and it's kind of hard to imagine anyone like putting it on for 5 minutes, being like, I don't know, I'm going to turn it off. Like, you were so thrust into that story.
But what I love about him is and it was right back to The West Wing, in which, or all its films, he just has faith in the intelligence of the people watching, which often with me in The West Wing, who when I watched it knew very little about American politics, I think I would pick up about sort of 40% of what was going on. But the point is, he creates, the characters talk with such authority and intelligence that you are always behind them, but you are always like on the edge of your seat, keeping up with them. And that's a thrilling thing, Yeah. And of course, he talks about the fact that, of course, they're all staggeringly intelligent. They all have quips that, and that, of course, that's pretty joyous to play as well, by the way. People that are fantastically bright. And I'm the guy that, when you're in an argument or something, someone says something, you're like, yeah. And then 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh, yeah. God, I wish I'd said that. And then, whereas with Aaron's writing, you just get to say that.
When you're an Aaron Sorkin character, you're always a smart. Well, you're like one of the 10 smart people in the room. No, like, exactly. That's the thing about this movie, is everyone is brilliant. I think as a final question, obviously you said Aaron knew Tom Hayden pretty well, but have you heard from other people who knew him, family or anything, kind of reflect on your performance?
Do you know Tom? Tom obviously is no longer with us, but his widow, Barbara Williams, kindly reached out to Aaron, which he told me about in a really generous way, which was lovely, and so that meant a great deal.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a nerve-wracking thing to imagine, that then you get the resolution of knowing that
it was interesting, because I suppose because I went into this film playing Aaron's version of Tom and being really conscious of that, going, from all the research I'd done, there was stuff that, that was not necessarily that moments that I thought I didn't think were him. So I sort of was really going in openly saying, this is Aaron's take on it, and I'm going to jump into that version of it. But also wanting to be deeply respectful to a guy who I really admire. So it did mean a lot.
Well, Eddie Redmayne, thank you so much for talking to me, for making this great film for us to get to talk to. And thank you.
Thank you, Katey.